Rachel always had been the sister who, according to everyone, had everything to succeed. She ended up a brilliant MBA, with a future that could have it taken to skyscrapers in New York or to corporate boards in London. But he chose other path. Accompany David, a man with a serene look and hands tanned by the land, towards a life in the field. While others, they boasted million-dollar contracts and marble offices. I learned to measure the rain, to count carrots, and to listen in the boo land, a silent language that few they knew read. For her, that decision meant freedom and authenticity. But for the others was a reason for ridicule. And who else was in charge of reminding him was his sister Victoria, who for 15 years turned every family gathering into a scene of humiliation in disguise. She talked about international clients and five-star hotels, while compared that glow with Rachel's limited life in the farm. What hurt the most was not just his words, but how Emma, the Rachel's daughter, was absorbing that poison to the point of feeling ashamed to tell where it comes from came, and that not in he. The heart of mother and daughter only tightened, until day in which the rope was on the verge of breaking up. Emma's wedding. The vineyard in Oregon, it seemed designed so that everything would work out perfect. Rows of grapes in exact parallels, glass lanterns blown hanging like moons small, a breeze that moved the linen tablecloths with the same care with which a mother combs her hair. Daughter. Marcus, the boyfriend, went from table to table greeting the uncles, and Emma with a dress that reminded me he pale glow of the dawn. He repeated a nervous gesture with a thumb, scraping without give count along the seam. Rachel the observed with that mixture of tenderness and alertness that only mothers know. I knew that Victoria was there with its expensive perfume of garden and a Velha mania of occupying the center of the room as if in light Fosse private property. David at his side pressed the jaw when saw the sister-in-law intercept the first guests in the entrance, and in his gaze passed, quick as a lightning, that silent calculation of someone has learned to read storms before the sky darkens. Victoria did not lose time. In each greeting there was a hidden dart. What miracle to see Rachel away from counting carrots. Emma, darling, remember that there are a world bigger than the furrows of a farm. David, you should be proud that your humble work is taught Rachel the word sacrifice. These were phrases spoken with presenter a smile and hand placed on a forearm alien, that touch of false intimacy that only seeks to fix the humiliation. Some guests responded with short giggles, others with awkward silences and glances at the floor. Rachel swallowed his answer like someone who keeps a broken glass in his pocket so that it doesn't hurt anyone, and continued attentively holding the scene with the only resource that was left in that minute. Take a deep breath. Hold back straight and trust that Emma wouldn't mistake that theater with the truth of his life. Dinner began with a deployment impeccable. Crystal glasses that returned the light as small fires, plates decorated with edible flowers, and a murmur collective that mixed toasts, laughter, and knives touching porcelain. Rachel tried concentrate in the taste of wine that David had selected so carefully, but every word of Victoria's felt like an insistent buzz in her ear. She rose from her chair to greet, leaned over the shoulders of the guests, and, as if so salt to the wind, he repeated that Rachel had wasted his education, that Emma should not repeat her mother's mistake. Emma, increasingly shrunken, looked sideways at Marcus as if asking refuge, while he held hands under the table, trying to be an anchor in half of the waves. When arrive. At the time of the speeches, Rachel felt the air thicken. The master of ceremonies had barely opened the mouth when Victoria, as if she had rehearsed every movement, took the microphone. Her heels resounded over the wooden platform, and the murmur of those present died away in an expectant silence. With a firm and modulated voice, he began congratulating the boyfriends, but soon the tone changed. He gave a short laugh and announced that he had a special surprise. Rachel squeezed David's arm under the table. He returned a serious look, like a soldier who recognizes the whistle of a projectile before seeing it fall. Emma, in his chair, tensed as if the seams of the dress were shackles, and everyone waited the blow that Victoria was about to strike. Victoria raised a white envelope with a theatrical gesture, like someone reveals the last card in a poker game. In a voice full of false generosity, he said he wanted to save his niece of the mediocrity. He spoke of corporate opportunities, of real contacts, of a check he opened doors where the land only made dirty the hands. Every word it was laced with poison disguised as advice. Emma doesn't deserve to be trapped in a life of limitations, he insisted. looking directly at Rachel as if his sister out a collapsed wall that everyone was forced to contemplate. The living room hole, it seemed, contained the breathing, between uncomfortable and fascinated by the cruel spectacle that Victoria had put on. Rachel felt the blood rush to her rose to his face, not from shame, but from a mixture of anger and exhaustion accumulated over the years. Endured so many times the comparisons that almost could anticipate every word, but never I had imagined that his own daughter would be used as a trophy of humiliation in her wedding. Emma came down the gaze, unable to hold the weight of those phrases that seemed scratch his skin. Marcus tried to intervene, but the force of the scenery heist the voice. David, on the other hand, did not move away. Victoria's gaze. Her silence had an edge, like a knife hidden under the tablecloth. At that moment, Rachel knew something was about to break, and that, contrary to usual, she wouldn't be the one that would collect the pieces. The murmur transformed in discomfort, open. Dry coughs, glasses clinking against the plates. Glances that sought any spot of the living room except the Rachel's face. Victoria, enjoying the tense silence, continued with his show. He talked about his own career, how had climbed steps in the advertising industry, travel industry first class, and dinners with executives. This is what happens when one takes advantage his education, he said, raising the chin as if signing a contract with the air. Emma seemed shrink in the chair, his gasping for air as Rachel fought the urge to get up and tear him away. He microphoned to your sister. But David placed a firm hand on the highs. It was not yet time. So something unexpected happened. The doors of the hall opened, and he entered a man older, impeccable suit, walking confidently as if the time would have passed, stopped to give him step. It was the Mr. Harrison, regional manager of the Ritz-Carlton, someone whose presence was not needed presentation. He walked directly towards David and Rachel. He shook their hands warmly and asked the word. "I came tonight because I couldn't miss this moment," he said with a deep and serene voice. Everyone bowed forward, expectant, and Victoria, for the first time, lost composure. The white envelope. It lowered slowly, like a banner defeated before its time. Mr. Harrison took a microphone with a calm that contrasted with the accumulated tension in a living room. He explained that he had been working for months with David and Rachel in an ambitious project, an annual supply contract for products organic for the whole luxury hotel chain, then revealed the figure, $2.5 million per year. The murmur exploded in applause and exclamations. The glasses rattled with the echo of the surprise. Rachel felt the air, thick minutes before, now filled with oxygen new. David, silent as ever, just nodded. With a slight gesture, but his eyes glowed like contained embers. Victoria, on the other hand, stood rigid, the frozen smile, unable to digest what he heard. Emma suddenly straightened up. In his chair, my breath, once ragged, became steady. The humiliation I had felt was transformed in pride in seeing their parents recognized publicly. The applause seemed to wash away years of poisonous comments, as if each clap undid a knot in her chest. Rachel looked at her daughter and saw, for the first time in a lot time, that the shame had gone from her eyes. The whole thing overturned toward the family, celebrating an achievement that until then had remained hidden. And it was in the middle of that ovation when Rachel understood. The true always had been there, waiting for the exact moment to reveal itself like a flare in the darkness. Victoria tried to recover the control, laughing with a high note that sounded more like a break than a triumph. He stammered something about coincidences and projects, temporary. But the words fell to the ground like broken glass that no one wanted to pick up. Some guests, until a few minutes ago, lined up with his theatricality. Now they diverted the look, ashamed of having laughed with their mockery. Rachel sat upright, with a calmness that was not indifference, but the certainty that the time there was made justice without her, had to lift a finger. Emma the observed with a glow new in the eyes, a mixture of pride and rediscovery, as if at last could see his mother as she was. A woman strong that had chosen a different path, but no less valuable. And here wanna stop me 1 second. If you got this far in the story, tell me in the comments from where you are watching it. What's coming now is the most intense part, where the masks fall and the truths, although hurt, they show themselves naked. Because at that moment, when everyone was waiting for Victoria to take back control of the evening, Emma, with barely a sigh to gather her courage, stood up from the table. The murmur died away suddenly, and the young man, who had grown hiding behind silence and shame, was about to prove that he had inherited from his parents something much stronger than any title or fortune: the ability to choose his own destiny. Emma took a microphone with. Her hands were trembling, but her voice came out clear, like a glass that breaks and leaves past the light. He looked at the guests, then at Victoria, and finally at his parents. "I have nothing to I'm ashamed," he said. The silence that followed was so deep that it was heard the touch of the wind moving the curtains of the living room. "I have seen my parents work from dawn to dusk. I have seen what it means to build with hands something that others only know how to sign in papers. And if I have to choose, I choose yours path, I choose yours example, I choose this life." The statement fell like a resounding bell in every corner of the vineyard. The guests, moved, began to applaud, some even standing up. Rachel felt tears well up in her eyes, were burning in the eyes, not of sadness but of a pride that never had felt so strongly. David, always reserved, squeezed the lips in a line that barely contained an excited smile. Victoria, on the other hand, seemed shrink, as if every word of his niece hit her directly in its carefully constructed facade. The envelope with the check remained abandoned on the table, turned into a useless object, a symbol of a battle that has already had lost before starting. A woman with hair silver, a state court judge and friend of Rachel's since childhood university, he rose from his seat and asked the word. With a firm voice, he emphasized the Thompsons' integrity and how his farm had been an example of sustainability and an educational model for community programs. Shortly after, Sios, a Forbes editor, invited by Marcus, frantically took notes, muttering about a possible article titled, "The Farm That Redefined Green Luxury in the United States." Each intervention was a more brick in the wall that protected Rachel and David, and that left Victoria isolated, reduced to the role of antagonist in a work where she already nobody wanted to applaud him. The tension became irreversible when a colleague of Rachel's MBA raised her glass and said, "Rachel always was the brightest among us, and now I see that too was the bravest." That phrase, full of sincerity, ended up tilting the scales. The living room hall exploded in applause again, this time accompanied by shouts of support. Emma, with the microphone still in hand, looked at his aunt with serenity surprising and added, "We don't need your check, Aunt. I return here, in front of everyone, because my life cannot be bought or redeemed with money alien." And so, with a simple gesture, placed the envelope the main table, like someone leaves fall a costume that never fit. Victoria stayed frost, with a face as rigid as cracked porcelain. The whole room was a mirror of what he had tried to hide for years. His empire was crumbling, and now everyone they saw, some guests were murmuring about rumors of debts and projects failed, while others simply they observed with a mixture of pity and disapproval. Rachel didn't need to say a word. The contrast was so evident that the dignity that had been denied for so long now, surrounded her like a cloak impossible to snatch away. Emma, still standing, seemed higher, firmer, as if in an instant would have stopped being a daughter to become an heiress of the courage of their parents. In the midst of that charged silence, Rachel took a deep breath and allowed herself something she had rarely done. Fact, rest in recognition of the others without feel guilty. The truth. It was in plain sight, without any embellishments or justifications. And if this part of the story made you feel something, support with a me like, and share it with someone who needs listen to her. Because what happened afterwards, it was not only the public fall of Victoria, but also the final release of Rachel and her family. What until then day it had been a wound, open it closed in front of everyone, transforming in scar and in lesson. Victoria, unable to bear it any longer, left a microphone on the table and left of the lounge with clumsy step, the echo of her heels sounding like a shameful retreat. The rest of the evening continuous with a different, almost liberating air. The guests, now focused on Emma, Rachel, and David, shared sincere toasts, and the conversations were turning around the farm, his bright future. Emma danced with Marcus, light as if she had just taken off a backpack full of stones, and Rachel watched as his daughter laughed without fear, as if finally would have recovered the innocence that the shame you had snatched in the adolescence. David, quieter than ever, allowed himself a gesture of complicity. He raised your cup in direction to Rachel, and he held on for just a second longer, Enough for her understood that this was his shared victory, but the consequences did not end that night. In the following weeks, Victoria's facade cracked without remedy. Your accounts were reviewed, the debts appeared in the light, and their reputation in the company where I worked became unsustainable. The husband, tired of supporting the theater, gradually distanced himself, and even his children. They began to feel ashamed of the attitudes that they previously imitated without question. The echo of his defeat in Emma's wedding was circulating still in family groups and in dinner table conversations. For Rachel, however, there was no satisfaction in seeing his fall sister. The only thing I felt was the certainty that the cycles of humiliation had come to an end. The final blow came a month later, when Victoria called Rachel in a muffled voice, almost unrecognizable. For the first time in decades, there was no arrogance in his words, only a trace of pleading. He needed $50,000 to avoid immediate seizure, and asked with the desperation of someone who knows that he has exhausted all the outings. Rachel listened silently, remembering every dinner where she was ridiculed, every haughty look she had had to endure. However, he did not feel hate, just a deep tiredness and the clarity that this time I was not going to repeat the cycle that there was kept tied up for so many years. In a firm but calm voice, Rachel replied that she did not would give money, because it was not what his sister needed. He offered him, in return, contacts for therapy, counseling, financial, and the possibility of a consultant who could help her retrace her steps. Victoria remained silent on the other end of the line, as if that answer would have been harder than a slam the door. But Rachel didn't tremble. She knew that helping wasn't always rescuing. With tickets, but to put limits that would force the another person to take care of your own life. That night, as she hung up, Rachel felt that she had finally cut the last rope that joined to the past of humiliations. 6 months later, the news surprised everyone. Victoria had started to remake his life. There was accepted the aid professional that Rachel suggested, and although at first he did it out of pure obligation. Little by little he found himself in that process a real exit. Lost his job that he used as a trophy, but he discovered that he could start over without depending on the appearance. He called Rachel a couple of times, not to ask for money, but to thank her for not having it rescued in the way I expected. Those calls, they were clumsy with long pauses and heavy silences, but for the first time they had the texture of the honesty. Emma, upon hearing those news, smiled with a relief that there was not known before. "Perhaps the auntie is learning," he commented, and Rachel couldn't help thinking that, although the wound had been deep, the time and the true had made his work. David remained dedicated to the farm, now more prosperous than ever, and Emma and Marcus began your life with the icy certainty that they could choose without fear. The echo of that wedding became a permanent reminder that the dignity it is not negotiable, and that the success is not always measured with numbers or campaigns, but with the ability to remain true to oneself still when the world is determined in say it contrary. Rachel used to walk at dusk among the rows of the vineyard, when the orange light turned each leaf in a fire mirror. In those walks remembered the years of silence, the times that it went down the head to avoid a confrontation, and how that habit almost steals the voice forever. Now, however, he felt that every step claimed a different soil, one built with patience, authenticity, and the love of those who had chosen the truth above the appearance. Emma the sometimes accompanied, and in those mother and daughter walks, they talked about projects, trips, and life without fear of the comparisons. The past, it hurt, yes, but it no longer defined his days. The last time Victoria visited, introduced himself without makeup, with clothes simple and a tired air, but also with humility new in his eyes. He apologized to David and Emma, accepting that he had used the arrogance as a shield for too long. Rachel didn't respond with reproaches, but with a welcoming gesture. They invited to sit at the table and share a lunch simple, with farm products. That was the final victory. Not the multi-million-dollar contract, neither the public exposure, but the possibility of closing a cycle without hate. Because the true lesson of all that history was not to prove who had reason, but to learn that the boundaries heal. The authenticity protects and purpose gives meaning even when others do not understand.